Anita, wonderful. Dr. Goraya, wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Henry. Thank you for such a warm welcome. That's lovely. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to follow all the people that have spoken so eloquently before me, Sam and Lauren and Summer and Shell and Chris. I had to write the names down because I knew I wouldn't remember them. So I'm delighted to be here. Good.
Fantastic. Right, you've got some slides for us. And
I have some, yeah.
you do have some slides.
I
Do you need and you need us to load them up?
I'm not entirely sure how the platform works, but I have slides that I can do the presenter view on.
Yep. Do you want to? Well, I'll take you offline for a second. You can bring the slides on, and if you just share your screen, or if you're not sure how to do that, I think you've emailed
No. Okay, maybe I'm going to let you run them. Okay, this is going to freak me out. You run them.
You start talking, and the slides will magically appear as you talk.
Okay, great. Well, lovely to meet everybody. So my name is Dr. Anita Goraya, and I'm a CBT therapist. And I was myself diagnosed with ADHD when I was 55 years old. So let me just. So I used to be a GP, but life being what it was, it became too much and I became a CBT therapist. So as I said, I was diagnosed when I was 55 and I have two adult children with diagnosed in their 20s. Now I do most of my work with professionals and medics and entrepreneurs. And most of them are experiencing mental health problems alongside their neurodivergence. So the people I work with often recognise themselves as seeming to be high functioning on the outside, but feeling totally overwhelmed on the inside, a little bit like I'm feeling right now, to be honest. And the thing that I've often heard them say rather sadly is just what you said, Henry, which is like, I've tried CBT in the past, it didn't work for me. And today I want to tell you why and what might work instead. Okay, alrighty, I think I'm having a little bit of difficulty seeing my own, let's see, just give me a second, guys. All right, I'm going to settle for doing it like this. Okay, so if you're like me and you tend to take conference notes because your working memory is poor, you don't have to. The next slide has a QR code. So if you want to scan that, it will take you to a page where you can download all these slides pretty much straight away. And if you want to, you will also from there be able to subscribe to my free Substack publication, where I write extensively on adult ADHD and offer a lot of guided self-help. Okay, next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is why ADHD often fails, why CBT often fails ADHDers. It doesn't serve them as well as it could. So I'm going to talk about three processes that are often experienced by, or three phenomena that are often experienced by ADHDers, but much less so by neurotypical people. So there's alexithymia, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and overwhelm. And I'm going to show how an enhanced CBT model that through my clinical experience I've developed, that builds on standard CBT while retaining fidelity to the underlying theory and principles of CBT, but really adapting it for people with some of these issues that we can see above. After we've done that, we'll move to the more participatory bit of the presentation, in which I'll give a brief demonstration of how all human minds are designed to work. And Henry, I'm going to need your support for this, okay? So you'll be my guinea pig, my co-experimenter, if that's okay. And then after that, we'll move into a guided self-soothing practice, which I've pre-recorded. It's called the campfire visualization, and it's a practical skill that we can all do together in order to soothe our emotional distress whenever it appears. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay. So here we are. Why does CBT often fail ADHDers? Well, CBT is based on some basic premises, one of which is that you can access calm, reflective thinking and that you can regulate your emotions fairly readily. But as we all know, ADHD brains often go into hijack and we become overwhelmed. And of course, being able to think calmly and reflect isn't going to land when your whole nervous system is on fire. So if we touch here on just a little bit of basic neuroscience, the brain has two parts. This is quite simplified, of course, but it holds true, largely speaking. So there's the ancient part of the brain called the amygdala, and there's a more evolutionarily advanced part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. Now, the amygdala takes in inputs from our senses, and it outputs only in terms of emotions. That's all it generates. It doesn't add any interpretations or appraisals. It just deals with emotions. The prefrontal cortex, the more evolutionarily advanced part of the brain, that's where we do our logical, rational thinking. We add in context and we make appraisals. Now, the way that the human brain is designed is that all inputs get to the amygdala marginally before they reach the prefrontal cortex. And if the amygdala is highly activated, or what I've termed as hijacked, into a big emotional response, like fear or really feeling terribly sad, this literally switches off the neural pathways to the prefrontal cortex. So that when people say, I was so scared I couldn't think straight, they are literally telling the truth. They couldn't think straight because this has switched off the prefrontal cortex. So there's no access to rational thinking. And of course, we know that our ADHD brains often go into hijack. And when that happens, we're in survival mode. We're not in thinking clearly mode. So any CBT that doesn't really acknowledge and work with that sort of, what for us is a rather tough reality, may not land. We may well need to do quite a lot of emotional recognition and regulation work before we're ready to do anything else. Okay, so next slide, please. Okie doke. So the three common experiences that I've mentioned are when you can't name what you're feeling, rejection sensitivity, when rejection really hits very hard and fast, and overwhelm, which is when we become flooded over either by lots of thoughts or by our emotions. Next slide, please. So let's start with alexithymia. Well, what is alexithymia? It means no words for emotions, and it affects, a pretty high percentage, up to 40% of people with ADHD. Now, alexithymia doesn't mean that people with it don't have any feelings. Absolutely, they have lots of feelings. The core features are that they have difficulty in identifying the feelings, in being aware of what emotions have turned up. So finding it difficult to distinguish perhaps between something like anger or frustration or sadness. Let's say that's a better example, anger and excitement. The second core feature is difficulty in being able to describe or express those emotions, so not being able to actually say what's going on in the internal experience. And the third key feature is having a thinking style in which you avoid internal emotional reflection, and you tend to focus on external circumstances instead. So alexithymia is linked to weak interoception, and interoception is the ability to tune in to what's happening internally, both in your body, physically, and in your emotional state. So really alexithymia is kind of less about, I can't put it into words, and more like, well, I don't even get a clear signal to start with. So I'll give you an example of this from myself. Because the internal signals are weak, we can end up leaning on external cues more. So, for example, I tend to find it quite hard to recognize hunger in myself. And what will happen is that I start being a bit snappy or ratty, and my husband will just sort of give me that look that's like, oh God, you know, she's gone off on one. And when I see that, I think, oh, okay, I'm being snappy, I must be hungry. So it's kind of that making sense kind of from an outside in rather than inside out way. Yeah, so maybe that resonates with some of you. Perhaps some of you get hangry as well. And there's also a paradox in that sometimes people will say with alexithymia will say, well, I don't think I can have that because, you know, I can really tell when someone else is upset. So the paradox is that you can have alexithymia and be highly tuned in to other people, but actually confused by your own emotions. And sometimes this can happen because people, it's not genuinely a kind of true compassion. It's more that people with alexithymia can sense that there are strong emotions about somewhere, but not quite kind of sure who they belong to, because this internal external thing is quite fuzzy. So it means that people with alexithymia can detect and find other people's distress as very aversive. You know, it's very kind of, I don't like this reaction, more than a sort of genuine compassion for the other person. Not to say that people with alexithymia don't have compassion, but because they do, but to make the point that it can be quite a nuanced situation. Next slide, please. So what are the key clues that you might be experiencing alexithymia? So if you often feel overwhelmed or flooded, but you can't really explain why, or if you sense that there is something going on inside, but you know, you don't feel anything much, or when someone asks you, how do you feel? What's going, you know, how are you? There's often the answer, I don't really know. So that will happen in therapy a lot. I'll ask someone, how are you feeling now? And they'll say, I don't really know. So that can be a clue. If you struggle to tell your emotions apart from one another, to differentiate between them, so not being quite sure whether it's sadness or guilt or shame or what. If you tend to be uneasy with other people's feelings, or you find that you avoid emotional conversations, or if you have a tendency to attribute your decisions to events external to you rather than to your own emotional state. That can be a clue. And another one is if you tend to describe states rather than feelings. So, for example, it was stressful. Oh, it was really difficult for me that day, rather than being able to articulate, I felt anxious, I felt panicky, I felt scared, whatever the emotion might be. So this is a variety of clues. Next slide, please. And okay, so actually there is something called the Toronto Alexithymia Scale, which is available free online, which if you're interested in looking into alexithymia a bit more, you can have do that as questionnaire. It is a reliable, validated construct. So it has been peer reviewed psychologically as a construct. But why does the alexithymia matter? Because if you can't name your emotion, It's difficult to get into the basics of CBT because CBT, the basic underlying theory is that your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your bodily sensations, and your behaviors are all linked. These 4 features work as a system, and they all feed one another and work as a unit. And some of these constellations can be helpful and some can be unhelpful. And in order to create change, you need to be able to name quite clearly what your feeling is. And if you can't do that, you can see how it's going to be difficult to affect change in that 4-component model. So that's why it matters. So what are we going to do if we have alexithymia? Is it game over? Does that mean CBT is just not for you? No, absolutely not. The first step is a simple one of just trying to notice what the feeling tone is of what's arising for you. Does it feel pleasant or unpleasant? Do you have the sense that you want to move towards this feeling because it feels nice and good in some way? Or do you have this sense that you want to move away from it, even though you don't exactly know what it is? You find yourself doing this. Even being able to identify this is a start in being able to explore emotions. And for anybody out there who has any interest in Buddhism, you might recognize this concept of feeling tones as something called Vedana. Anyway, that's an aside. So some of these other things that we can do, we can use a feelings wheel to build vocabulary. So the feelings wheel has several layers so that you can expand very broad categories like anger into more precise shades like frustration, resentment, rage, fury, etc. There's a level of intensity to each of those. And in fact, the feelings gauge is yet another exploration in which what you're looking at is an intensity of an emotion. So you rate it from 0 to 10. And the idea being that if you can notice it quicker, then before you get to crisis point, if you can notice that you're sort of 6 out of 10 angry, you might be able to intervene more effectively at that point rather than only recognizing it when you're absolutely enraged at 10 out of 10. And then finally, there are some simple daily noticing practices, like just jotting down at the end of each day 3 emotions that you've experienced, or using music or photos or characters in novels to name the emotions that the music gives you, or that when you look at a photo, what does it evoke in you? So these are ways that, for sure, I have offered these ways to many of my clients. They build an emotional vocabulary. Next slide, please. So the next thing that we want to talk about, the experience, is of something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Now, everybody dislikes rejection, but RSD is a different thing. It's not about taking things personally or being thin-skinned. What it is a sudden, overwhelming pain that can literally be felt physically. People will say, it's like I was, stabbed. I felt that much pain with it, or like there was a lump or a boulder in my stomach. So it is a sudden, wordless pain after real or perceived loss of approval, love, or respect. It's always triggered by something. It might be by criticism, teasing, humiliation, or the sense that you've let yourself or someone down. And when it hits, your whole system is hijacked. You hit that amygdala hijack. There's no gradual build-up. It's instant, intense, and it feels like your survival is on the line. And it's not just one emotion. It'll create a whole cascade of threat, of reaction, and fallout. Remember that when you have a rejection sensitivity dysphoria episode, it is an amygdala hijack. and it means that your prefrontal cortex is switched off. So there's no chance for you to assess realistically whether that funny look was actually someone rejecting you, or perhaps it was just them having a bad moment while they happen to look in your direction. You know, you're not going to be able to do that when your amygdala's on fire like this. And just to mention the point that rejection sensitivity dysphoria can coexist with alexithymia. So yeah, that adds to the fun of it, I guess. Next slide, please. So how might you work out if you're experiencing rejection sensitivity dysphoria? Well, people are often on very high alert. They're constantly scanning for even tiny cues of disapproval. And when the rejection hits, some people explode and rage, tears, collapse, whereas others implode internally and spiraling internally into shame or despair or withdrawal. And that inner critical voice is really brutal. You know, I'm lazy, I'm broken, I'm not good enough. You know, these really harsh, I don't belong, I don't fit in, I'm weird, all these things. Naturally enough, if you're experiencing this, people cope by, well, doing what feels safe, which is to withdraw, to avoid taking risks. Or they might go the other way and start trying to be perfectionists, you know, to be perfect, to get everything right, to please people all the time, to never say no, to mask what they're really feeling. So they may present differently in different people, but inside it's the same raw pain of rejection. Next slide, please. So why does RSD matter and what helps? Well, it matters because it doesn't fade away quickly, the amygdala. It sticks and it spirals. And as we've said, it triggers these cycles of avoidance, harsh criticism. And so your thoughts and your emotions and your physical sensations and your behaviors are all locked in this vicious cycle that keeps the high sensitivity alive and makes it harder for you to recover. The good news is that even one or two small tools can kind of soften that spiral. Remember, your amygdala is doing this. You can't think your way out of this. What will help is to regulate the body first. So doing some breathing, just breathing in deeply and then out, or doing some movement, some stretching kind of exercises, moving or shaking, which always looks a bit funny, but is quite kind of a good way to return into the body. If it's really too much and you can't regulate the body, you can use, for a short period of time, some simple distraction. Deliberately distract yourself from it. Go and see your favorite comfort show or cuddle a pet or something like that. And you're doing this knowing that it is in order to give your nervous system a breather, to let that amygdala calm down. So again, other methods of soothing that you can use at this stage are, for example, naming the story. So rather than being fused with this feeling of rejection, seeing if you can just pull away from it a little bit by saying, look, here's the unlovable me story appearing. Or you might write it down. Journaling can be very helpful to people to contain their distress. And the most powerful of all is to be compassionate to yourself, to talk to yourself as you would to a friend with kindness. Now, these things don't erase rejection sensitivity dysphoria, but they can break the cycle and give you a way back. I should also say that some ADHD medications, particularly guanfacine, which is one of the non-stimulants, and some of the stimulant amphetamines can also help with rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then the third of our ADHD typical experiences is overwhelm. Okay, so for us, overwhelm isn't just stress, it's a full system shutdown. brains are processing a lot and very fast. And I tend to think of it in two stages. There's overload, which is kind of like the amber on a traffic light system. So the amber overload is when you're stretched, you're distracted, agitated, but you are still able to intervene with coping skills. So you might pause for a break, you might step back from a task, you might delegate or ask someone else for help. So you're still able to use your thinking brain to take action. Overwhelm is the red state on the traffic light system. The amygdala is hijacked, prefrontal cortex has gone offline, and you can't think or plan or organize or control. There's not much self-control accessible at this point. And so what happens then is that you default to automatic reactions, really, rather than responses. They're just automatic reactions like freezing, panicking, shutting down, lashing out, numbing behaviors like scrolling on your mobile or binge eating or whatever. They're not really chosen reactions. They are sort of survival reflexes when the thinking brain is out of action. Next slide, please. So what are the clues that you might be feeling overwhelmed? Well, overwhelm is usually set off not usually by one big thing, perhaps more commonly by lots of demands stacking up and then exceeding your resources. So, too many commitments, haven't said no to enough stuff, not been sleeping properly, not eating well, or resting well, or being overloaded. The senses are overloaded. There's too much going on. You're trying to drive the car and the kids are shrieking in the background and the traffic's awful and you're late already. Just too much going on that can just hit you into this overwhelm. And we all have our signature thoughts and feelings, physical sensations and behaviors, and our behaviors can be private internal ones or visible external ones when we're overwhelmed. So happy to share that when I'm overwhelmed, I usually tend to have thoughts like, why can't other people see that I'm struggling here? And my emotions are often ones of feeling angry or feeling hopeless. My body will often feel quite restless or fatigued, a lot of muscle tension, just a sense of exhaustion. And in terms of behavior, internally, I'm often doing quite a lot of blaming and relentlessly worrying about what if this happens now, what if that happens now. And my externally visible behaviors, what you might say if you were looking at me, is that I'll visibly, I don't want to interact with anybody, and you'd probably see me watching a fair bit of mindless TV and eating lots of crisps. So while these are all understandable in the short term, it's understandable that we would do these things. Ultimately, they do maintain my distress because they're not actually helpful. They don't resolve anything as such. Okay. So next slide, please. So why does overwhelm matter and what helps? So again, it matters because it's an amygdala hijack. You can't think your way out. So the first step is going to be, again, to soothe the body. And we've already talked about some things that you can do, the breathing exercises, but there are other things like smelling a favorite scent that perhaps is related to your past in some way, something that makes you feel happy, or it could be having massaging yourself. I often find that relieving tension around my temples or around my jaw can just help a little bit. Now, I want to manage your expectations here. I'm not for one moment suggesting that these soothing techniques are going to reduce your overwhelm from like a 10 out of 10 down to a 0. That's not going to happen. But even if it reduces it from, let's say, an 8 down to a 6 within 10 minutes, well, let me tell you, if that was a drug that could give you 20% reduction in your symptoms within 10 minutes, that drug company would be making a hell of a lot of money. Okay, so that's a massive return on investment if you can spend some minutes doing something and achieve a shift in your sense of reduction in stress. Okay, so some other methods are to use visualizations, and we're going to do one later on, as I've already said. And also offering yourself some compassion. Again, we're going to come to this, but that shift from battling overwhelm to offering compassion is what's going to help your prefrontal cortex to come back online so that thinking becomes possible again. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, great. So this slide, which gave me and my family a lot of hassle to put together, was my kind of way of trying to show you how I think about CBT for ADHD. On the left is the standard CBT cake. And, there's lots of layers in it. There's a thinnish layer of being able to, relax yourself and soothe yourself in all those ways we've described. And then there's a lot of focus on challenging unhelpful and unrealistic thoughts, and a lot of emphasis on behavioural change, so doing things differently. And through these processes, we find that our underlying beliefs about ourselves, about other people in the world, start to change indirectly. Now, that's a really good cake if you don't have ADHD. But for ADHDers, it often doesn't land, because by the time you're meant to be challenging a thought, your amygdala is already hijacked. So on the right is what I call the enhanced CBT for ADHD cake. And the layers are adapted. So there's actually a very thick layer up top of working with the emotions, of recognizing our emotions, of working with alexithymia, of working with RSD and overwhelm, recognizing them, and then learning skills to soothe those emotional experiences. So soothing the amygdala is a big chunk at the top. Then, speaking to what so many of the people before me were talking about, the normalizing your experiences, this is so important. ADHD psychoeducation, as we call it. So if you take a bunch of ADHDers together, there will be quite a lot of commonality of experiences. But we are only 3 or 4% of the population. And so although there are common experiences to us, the other 96, 97% of the population don't kind of get that, because that's not their experience. So it's a really important part of the work that I do, is helping people to understand what ADHD is. Yes, it is a dopamine deficit in the brain, and that means that your wiring is different, and that means that's why you have difficulty dealing with your emotional upsets. The emotional regulation is disturbed in ADHD. That's why it's difficult to get stuff done, to plan, to organise, and to enact. And that normalising is incredibly important. Now, the daily body reset is really about addressing upfront that to ensure that your basic bodily needs are being addressed, like sleep, nutrition, compliance with medication if you're taking it, drinking enough fluid, getting exercise, etc. Because you can do all the psychotherapy you want in the world, but if you are always tired because you're not getting enough sleep, or you are not you're not getting the right nutrition in, you're going to get a limited benefit. So we do need to do some work on that. And then, of course, just as in the other cake, we do behavioural change. We need to learn to do things differently. So all those executive skills that are not so functional in us, we need to learn how to use diaries and to-do lists and timers. I know Henry was laughing about that, but we do need to learn how to do those things, and we do need to have changes to our environment to support us as well. So, for example, reasonable adjustments at work or in exams at school, etc. And all the way through this, woven throughout, is indeed the thought challenging work, the challenging unhelpful beliefs and testing them out through small experiments in real life. So if I have developed a belief over all these years that if I ask for what I want, other people will say no, then behavioral experimentation would be to test that out in a low stakes experiment to see what really happens in the first instance. If I ask a good friend for something, and then I might try asking somebody who's just sort of neutral, maybe not such a good friend. So we raise the stakes, graduated exposure to challenging the beliefs and then trying it out in practice. And so in exactly the same way, in both cakes, beliefs are being changed indirectly. But the recipe with my enhanced model is much more ADHD friendly. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're getting to the practical component of the experiment. Henry, are you there? Henry, are you there?
I am.
Okay, all right.
I've got to admit that Lauren has been taking over doing the slides, so thank you, Lauren.
Okay, so Henry, will you help me in this experiment? I think we might have done it before, the pink elephant experiment.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do is this little experiment, very brief, and you can all do it as well as we do. It's just that Henry will offer me his feedback. And this is to show you how all human brains have been designed to work. In other words, to show that how our minds are not some weirdly functioning oddities. You know, how our minds work is very largely dependent on how it's been designed to work. So what I want you to do, Henry, and everybody else, is for the next 20 seconds, you're allowed to think about anything that you like at all, but you're not allowed to think about a pink elephant. So you're not allowed to think about a pink elephant riding a bicycle in a lovely tutu under a big circus tent top with Disney's Fantasia music in the background. So you can think about anything else you like, but you're not allowed to think about a pink elephant. And of course, thinking, oh, I'm not thinking about one is going to count as a pink elephant. So now I've actually switched my phone off, as your lovely instructions said. So I'm just going to kind of guesstimate 20 seconds. So everybody do this. And at the end of that, Henry will tell us what his outcome was. Okay, so the 20 seconds starts now. Okay, so that was about 20 seconds. So Henry, how did it go? How often did you think of a pink elephant?
I definitely thought of a pink elephant for like at the start, and I knew I was to not think about a pink elephant, which I am currently. So we've had a late agreement to create a slide for the first session of tomorrow morning, which is across international, all the different countries, talking about what they're doing, what the situation is for them. And I was thinking about my slide.
Okay,
but I was purposely trying to think hard about my slide and not think about pink elephants. And initially it did not work, and then it did.
Okay, so it sounds like you thought about the pink elephant a few times, and then you thought about something else. But when the pink elephant kind of flitted back, what did you do? Did you sort of try and avoid looking at the pink elephant, or even to sort of push it away? No, I'm thinking about the slide for tomorrow. What were you doing?
Well, I've had the benefit of talking to you before, so I knew that wouldn't work. So I just tried to think harder about my slide. But I thought I might have got this wrong. I was genuinely, I'm not going to think about a pink elephant. You've taught me well.
Okay, all right, you're mucking this up, Henry. Okay, so
I'm pretty certain I mucked it up last time, though, too, to fair to me.
Okay, so normally what people will report, and maybe you guys can reflect on your own experience if you were doing it at the same time, is that, you know, you think about the pink elephant quite a lot. And when the thought arises, actually, there's a tendency to avoid it, to kind of look the other way and sort of try and push it away. And that actually, when you do that, the pink elephant simply comes back again. It reappears. So the second part of this experiment, Henry, you've disappeared. Where are you?
thought I'd done so badly. Well, I actually technically succeeded.
Okay. All right. Now, the second part of this experiment, after which you'll be off the hook, the second part of this experiment is we're going to do the same, but I'm going to give you slightly different instructions, which is to say this time, before we start, think about, decide what you're going to place your attention on instead. Now, I always say, you can place your attention on something pleasant or present. So it could just be, okay, I'm going to spend the 20 seconds, just describing this rather boring Bic biro, and I can say it's red and it's got a hole at the end and it feels hexagonal, cold or something. Or you can deliberately think about the slide, what you're going to, and just turn your attention to that. And when the pink elephant comes, because the pink elephant almost certainly will appear, just let it be. Do not try and push it away. Just let it sit there, but you return your attention to your biro, or you're thinking about your slide, or whatever your pleasant or present thing is. And we'll see how that goes. So 20 seconds starts now. Okay, that was about 20 seconds. So what was the, how often did you think of the pink elephant this time?
Well, so you clearly are talking about, because now I did, basically what I did the first time was this part, which was not think about it, not push it away, and just let it sit, which is, I couldn't have spoken to it, but it's definitely what I did. I was even more successful about thinking about my slide and this time, and the elephant did, just because you'd obviously repeated pink elephant many times, did appear at the start, but much less, and then it was gone, because I knew my task even better, thanks to your guidance.
All right, thank you. So next slide, please.
So look, no hands. Thank you, Lauren. I'm to go now?
No, the next, yes, I will need you in a minute to switch something on, but maybe Lauren can do that. Anyway, next slide.
Well, no, we're both here. We're both here.
Okay, great. That's it. So the pink slide, the pink elephant, not pink slide, the pink elephant experiment shows essentially that the mind is designed that if you try and avoid thinking about something or an image, and indeed this works for emotions too, they simply bounce back. So that suppressing things, turning away or pushing them away or suppressing them does not work. And that is because it's the brain's way of keeping you alert to threats. We basically made the pink elephant a threat in this experiment. And there is no way that your brain is going to let you forget a threat, because if the threat was a saber-toothed tiger about to leap at you and you just turned around and said, I'm not looking at you, you would be dinner. So, the brain is going always to keep you alert to threats. So when the second time we used a different approach, basically we let the pink elephant just sit in the background of our attention. We didn't suppress it, we didn't avoid it, but we also didn't go over and have a good old conversation with it either and look at it. Yeah. What we did was placed the majority of our attention on whatever we were attending to, whether that was our biro or our mental, whatever we were doing with the slide. So that's a different approach. It's not about avoiding, suppressing. It's not about fueling. Okay, so next slide, please. So now we move on to the last bit. I hope we're doing okay for time. This is a visualization exercise. And we're going to keep this idea of neither suppressing or avoiding unwanted guests, like difficult emotions, and also not feeling and fueling them in this visualization exercise. So this is another type of soothing practice. We've talked about other soothing practices already, and you can watch videos of me demonstrating a lot of these on my Substack. But for now, we will look at the campfire visualization. And when would we use it? Well, we want to use it when we have strong, uncomfortable emotions hijacking your thinking. And we will meet what arises with kindness, not struggle. And the reason we're doing a visualization exercise is because when we use our imagination, the brain actually responds as though something is real. Okay, so now I'm hoping Henry or Lauren, one of you will be able to play the video. I sent you the link for the campfire visualization video. I don't know whether that link at the bottom there is clickable on the slide. Otherwise, if you could copy and paste it or something.
Let me do that. I will need to do that for us.
Okay.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds. Yeah, I can do that. And we are running out of time. We've got to hand over to Australia in 5 minutes. It's a hard deadline. The continent won't wait.
Deadline. Well, would you prefer me? I tell you what, then I don't think we're going to have that video is 8 minutes long. So would you prefer either that I do a quick version of it live and I'll speed it up, or would you prefer to go to Q&A and people can go onto the Substack and look at it themselves? Whatever feels good to you guys.
I do a quick version. I think your slides are on the Global ADHD site as well. So I can check that. I'm just checking that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
Or we can direct people to your Substack. Would you prefer that? So I'll put the Substack on the Global ADHD site and people can go straight there.
I don't mind. So we could either do Q&A for a few minutes, or I can do a shortened version of the visualization, whatever you prefer.
I'd go for a shortened version.
Okay, great. All right, well, here we go. Yeah, I'd recorded it hoping that it would give me a few minutes rest, but there you go, no rest for the wicked. All right, so what we are going to do now then is to do a visualization exercise. It's a portable tool that you can do anytime that you are experiencing some distressing thoughts. Now, it works pretty well if you're in the middle of really strong emotions like a lot of anger or sadness, or also if you have smaller discomforts like restlessness or impatience or boredom. So while we're doing this, you may not feel anything overwhelmingly bad, but you might just be feeling a bit bored, thinking, when's she going to get on with it? So you can work with that. That can be your unwanted emotion, your unwanted guest. Okay. And even if you have, for example, alexithymia, and you don't really know quite what is turning up emotionally, just that sense of whether it's something you'd rather not have here, that sense of moving away from, that sense of unpleasant, you can use it on that. Okay, so just anchor your feet on the ground, and if you want to close your eyes, you can. Take a big breath in, a couple of slow, deep breaths in, and as you breathe out, you can relax any tension if you feel any in your body as best you can. And just begin by noticing what's here for you. Is there some irritation? Is there some impatience about getting on with this, or maybe wanting to go to bed now? Something like that. And if you can, name it, name the emotion. But if you can't, and it's just a sense of wanting to move away from whatever it is, that's good too. You can work with that. So just stay for a moment with this sense of observing whatever has turned up, whatever is here for you right now. Now picture yourself at dusk, standing tall and steady by a glowing campfire. And really use all your senses to imagine this scene. Your campfire might be on a beach with the sun setting in the background, or it might be in the forest. And really imagine what you can see and what you can feel, perhaps a cool breeze on your skin, or perhaps the warmth from the campfire. Maybe you can see embers flying off into the air. What can you smell? Really bring it to life. Perhaps you can smell salt in the air or pine needles. So whatever campfire comes to you, go with it. Now look at yourself standing there. You are steady you, calm, upright, and grounded. And then one by one, imagine the parts of you that are distressed, the worrying voice, the self-critical one, the sad one. See them approaching the campfire, and as each one arrives, greet it kindly. I see you. Come and sit by the fire. And offer each one a place on a log and a blanket to wrap up warm in. From your steady self, say to each one, no wonder you're here. Of course you're here. You're trying to help me. You're trying to deliver your message. Thank you. Thank you for that. But you don't need to take over. You can rest now. I've got this. Speak to them with kindness and care. And then rest. Rest quietly around that fire while steady you remains in charge, collected, calm, and present. And just allow a sense of togetherness and safety to build, knowing that you can always return to this place whenever you need to just rest and soothe yourself. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the room. Because I've got to go now. Thank you very much, Henry.
It's a beautiful moment, and I was like, oh, the clock is ticking down. So we're handing over to us, Anita. You've been amazing. Thank you so, so much.